I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, California senators call for investigations into rising gas prices, but there may be some relief ahead for consumers. And federal regulators say restarting the San Onofre nuclear plant could take years.
I'm Peggy Pico. Also tonight, we'll take an in-depth look at how California's two school propositions differ and who pays for the one that passes. And today was the first day San Diego County voters could cast their ballot for the November election. We'll talk with the county registrar of voters about deadlines and the new way to register.
And she was a San Diego broadcasting legend, a pioneering female journalist, and above all, our friend and mentor. Tonight we remember Gloria Pinner. KPBS Evening Edition starts now.
KPBS Evening Edition is made possible by Joan and Erwin Jacobs and by
Hello, good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dwayne Brown. The price of gas hit an all-time high in California today, $4.67 a gallon. Now, both of the state's U.S. senators are calling for federal investigations. Barbara Boxer wants the Justice Department to look into the skyrocketing costs. And Senator Dianne Feinstein is turning to the Federal Trade Commission. In a letter, Feinstein says, quote, publicly available data appears to confirm market fundamentals are not to blame for rising gas prices in California. She also says Californians are all too familiar with energy price spikes, which turn out years later to have been the result of malicious and manipulative trading activity. $4.67 a gallon is the statewide average. It's even higher for San Diego. Joining us to talk about the soaring gas prices is KPBS Business and Environment reporter Eric Anderson. So how high are prices today, Eric?
Well, retail gas prices are still setting records here in San Diego. The Oil Price Information Service and AAA say a gallon of regular cost a driver $4.72. That's the highest average price ever. And it's the third day in a row that a record price was recorded here in San Diego. If you're looking for hopeful news, prices on the wholesale market are down 30 cents a gallon. And analysts I talked to today say that that's a sign that retail prices could start drifting down as well.
Well, remind us what changed. Why are prices seemingly coming down?
Well, a couple of things actually happened. First of all, a major refinery came back online over the weekend. That helped ease some of the concerns about supply problems. Also, Governor Jerry Brown issued an order yesterday ordering the Air Resources Board to allow winter blended fuel to be sold now instead of waiting until the end of the month. Now, the summer fuel blend is formulated to keep from evaporating as quickly, and that protects air quality. Air quality officials say that using the winter blend this early shouldn't affect pollution unless there is an extended heat wave.
KPBS Business and Environment reporter Eric Anderson. Now, a moment ago, you saw a gas price sign. It might have looked a little familiar. We've actually been keeping an eye on one station at Fairmont and El Cajon in City Heights, just watching the price changes. Last Thursday, gas was $4.29 a gallon there. By Friday, $4.59 a gallon. And today, up to $4.79 a gallon. Tomorrow night, federal regulators will hold a public hearing on a plan to restart the San Onofre nuclear plant in the North County. But today, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission says restarting the plant could take years. The NRC says the restart plan could require a long, detailed review if the plant's operating license needs to be amended. Now, Tuesday night's hearing will be held at the St. Regis Monarch Beach Hotel in Dana Point. It starts at 6. A tough day for Alaska Airlines passengers. Flights were delayed in San Diego and across the country because of a fiber optic line. It went out. The outage shut down the airline's ticketing system for 5 hours. And once service was restored, it took a few hours to get things back to normal. A San Diego County Sheriff's detective remains in critical condition tonight, nearly 2 weeks after being wounded in a shootout with a suspected child molester. A blood drive was held in Santee today for Detective Ali Perez. He was hit in the stomach and arm in the shooting. His family says he has been in surgery nearly every day since then. Tributes and kind words have been pouring into KPBS since the death of our friend, colleague, and mentor, Gloria Pinner. She died Saturday after a 2-year battle with cancer. Gloria's title was senior political editor, but she was more than that, helping to make this station what it is today. She was inducted into the KPBS Hall of Fame with a Lifetime Achievement Award. We will have a tribute to Gloria's life and work a little later in this broadcast. But first, what she loved most, politics. 2 state ballot measures would raise taxes to fund California schools. Education reporter Kyla Calvert takes a closer look at what each proposition will do, who's supporting them, and why.
Bailing Shaw and Monique Clifford each have children who go to San Diego Unified's Language Academy in the college area. Clifford says years of state budget cuts have left the school in a bind.
We've cut any kind of fat, we've cut muscle, we're cutting limbs. We cannot cut anymore. It's too devastating, it's destabilizing.
Shaw agrees. Her son's 5th grade class has 41 students, but that's not the only problem.
My son's elementary school has no music unless it's paid for by parent fundraising. My son's elementary school has no art unless it's paid for by parent fundraising.
What Clifford and Shaw don't agree on is how to vote on Propositions 30 and 38 on November's ballot. Governor Jerry Brown is behind Proposition 30. That measure would raise sales tax by 1/4 cent for the next 4 years and increase income taxes on Californians earning more than $250,000 a year by between 1 and 3%. Clifford, who's also a teacher at the Language Academy, says supporting Brown's measure is the fairest way to go because it won't cut far into middle-income pocketbooks.
Parents, teachers have already been paying extra because they see what's needed and they've tried to meet those needs. And yet we're going to be willing to pay that extra sales tax.
In addition to being a parent, Shaw is the regional PTA spokeswoman, and California PTAs have gotten behind Proposition 38, which is backed by wealthy activist Molly Munger. The measure would raise income taxes on all but the poorest Californians by between 0.4 and 2.2% for the next 12 years. Those taxes are expected to raise about $10 billion a year. But Shaw says that's just the start of the differences between the 2 propositions.
The one that means the most to me is the setting up of an independent trust fund that will collect Prop 38 revenue and disperse it directly to schools on a per-child basis.
Some of the money would also go toward paying down state debts and to early childhood education programs. That separate account is key for Shaw because she says state lawmakers have a history of finding ways around California's minimum school funding guarantee.
The voters of California are sick of our schools getting ripped off by funds getting diverted out of the general fund for something else.
Funds from the governor's Proposition 30 would go into a new account that would be part of the state's general fund. In future years, the money would free up other state funds for other programs, not necessarily increase funding for schools. But Clifford says that's part of why she supports the measure.
We can't just think our schools need more money. Our schools need stable communities, and Prop 30 provides the extra support for public safety and health and human services. Our kids are not going to learn if they don't have basic needs met.
If Proposition 30 fails, this year's state budget is set to cut $5.3 billion from the state's public schools and community colleges, $500 million from its universities, and about $100 million total from other state departments and local public safety grants. Many education supporters, including San Diego Unified's Board of Education, are asking voters to vote yes on both measures. If both pass in November, the initiative with the most yes votes would be the one to go into effect. The board's president, John Lee Evans, says every voter who supports both is sending a clear message to legislators.
I think there's really going to be an outcry on the public's part for funding for public education. We rank number 47th in the nation in terms of per pupil funding, and this is just not acceptable. And I think the voters are really going to say, let's stand up and vote for anything that's really going to improve our schools.
But Chris Cate with the San Diego Taxpayers Association says by rejecting both measures, voters would be sending another equally important message.
We already have the second highest income tax rate in the country. We have the highest sales tax rate in the country.
He says if funding education is a state priority, it should be reflected in the budget.
They should focus on that rather than wasting time, energy, and money on things like high-speed rail or other pet projects that they want to get done.
Educators, students, parents, and taxpayers across San Diego County and the state are holding their breath, waiting to hear which message voters choose.
Joining us with a deeper analysis of the education funding propositions is my guest, Thad Kauser, political science professor at UC San Diego. Thad, both propositions include tax increases. Give us a breakdown on how these would differ and what it would mean if one passed or the other.
Well, Prop 38 is the most broad base. It raises just about everyone's income taxes, with the biggest income tax increase coming for the richest Californians. Prop 30 has this quarter-cent sales tax that we all pay, but then only touches the income taxes of the people making $500,000 or more. So about 80% of its money actually comes from the top 1% of income earners in California, whereas with Molly Munger's Prop 38, about a little less than half of it comes from the top 1%.
Does that mean we'd have less money for each, or would it balance out in between them?
Yeah, Prop 38 is bigger. It's about $10 billion a year. Prop 30 is only about $6 billion a year. So there's a difference in the size as well as who pays.
Prop 30 supporters are vocal about the dire consequences if it doesn't pass. Then these trigger cuts. Explain the link between trigger cuts and this proposition.
What the legislature and the governor said this year is we're going to cut a lot of areas in state government, but we're going to try to spare schools and higher education if Prop 30 passes. But if it doesn't pass, we're going to have to make about $6 billion in cuts in those areas because there's just no more money left.
What about with Prop 38? Are there consequences if that doesn't pass?
Well, if neither of these tax increase passes, we're just not going to have the money, and we're going to cut about $6 billion, which is equal to about 2 weeks of the school year being cut.
There's some work that the legislature has to do if Prop 38 doesn't pass in regards to trigger cuts. Explain that.
Well, if Prop 38 passes and beats Prop 30, if it's the only tax increase we have, then the trigger cuts are scheduled to go in effect, but voters will have just voted themselves a $10 billion a year tax increase. So the legislature will have to go to work, and I think they'd face tremendous political pressure to restore those trigger cuts. So the bottom line is, if either of these massive tax increases passes, we won't see cuts to education and colleges this year.
But if Prop 38, again, if it does pass, the legislature does have a point where they could say, no, we're not going to do it, and the trigger cuts would go through.
They could do that. They could say, well, we're going to cut schools at the same time the voters vowed to to tax themselves, and very likely a lot of them would get thrown out of office in 2014.
It wouldn't be a popular decision. A major difference between these two propositions is where the money goes. Tell me where the money goes for each of them.
Well, both of these take the money and put it into an education fund with that name. But because they do that, both of them in some ways decrease the pressure on the rest of state government. So Prop 30 puts it into an education fund, but the legislature could use the money it was going to spend on education and use it to increase spending in some of the areas that got cut to fund schools. Prop 38's money, 30% of it for the next few years goes to repaying the state debt. So again, the legislature could use the money it was using to pay down the state debt and use that to fill out some of the cuts it's made.
Both propositions could lose, but only one can win. Give us the rundown on how that works.
If both pass, meaning they both get over 50% of the vote, then the one with the most votes wins. So voters can know, they can vote for yes on both of these and they won't be double taxing themselves, or they could vote no.
Only one simple majority wins.
Only one with a simple majority.
Which one is ahead in the polls right now?
Prop 30 has been the one that's been leading in the polls by a very narrow margin the whole campaign. Prop 38 has been the one that's been trailing in the polls. So it looks like the governor's initiative, Prop 30, has the edge. But Molly Munger, this activist in education, has spent like $28 million of her own money on running all these ads for Prop 38. They look pretty good, and we'll see if that makes it rise in the polls. And also that might take down the support for Prop 30.
Do you think there's some voter confusion?
I think there's absolutely voter confusion, but that happens. That's the price of direct democracy. If you give the people the vote, we're going to have to study hard, go on the KPBS website, and learn about these things because these are tough choices.
All right. Thad Kauser, political science professor, UC San Diego. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Candidates running for San Diego races filed their latest campaign finance reports on Friday because we're less than a month away from Election Day. Raising funds and spending them is increasingly important. Ryan Grochowski joins us from the KPBS iNewsSource Investigations Desk. Ryan, what do the numbers in the mayor's race tell us this time around?
Well, in just about every filing period, Carl DeMaio has taken the fundraising lead, and this time was no different. He raised about $735,000 this period, which began July 1st and ended on September 30th. During the same period, Bob Filner raised only $275,000.
And how does that fit in with the rest of the election?
Filner has consistently brought in some of the lowest fundraising totals and DeMaio the highest. If you look at the totals election-wide, DeMaio has raised more than $2.6 million to Filner's near $800,000. You do need to keep in mind that DeMaio's given his campaign about $700,000 in personal loans and donations. But even if you take that away, it's clear he's raised more money.
And what about these independent expenditure committees we've been hearing all about?
The key to these committees is that they can spend and raise pretty much as much as they want. So they actually come close to evening the scales when it comes to money raised. There are committees for Filner and DeMaio and committees against each. So let's take a look at the committees for Filner. Together they've raised almost $1 million. There's also a committee formed in opposition to DeMaio. That one's raised nearly $200,000 this year. That's all money spent getting the word out in favor of Filner and against DeMaio. And if you take the pro-DeMaio and anti-Filner committees and add up their haul, it comes out to more than $500,000 going towards DeMaio's side. So these committees really even up both camps' fundraising totals, relatively speaking.
And what about spending so far overall?
So the committees are usually paying for campaign ads. It's both the campaign committees and these outside independent expenditure committees, and it's hundreds and thousands of dollars on television ads.
Brian Grohowski from our Investigations News Desk. And to read more about the candidates and to see who's donating to these committees, go to kpbs.org/election. It's the first day San Diego County voters can cast their ballot for the November election. Peggy Pico checks in with the county registrar for registration and voting options.
San Diego County Registrar Deborah Seiler joins us with the details on the newest way to register, early voting, and other options for casting your ballot in the upcoming presidential and mayoral elections. Deborah, thanks for being on the show again. How many people are registered to vote here in San Diego County?
Well, currently we have 1.4 million registered voters, very close to 1.5 million voters, which I expect to reach before the close of registration.
What's the party breakdown in that?
Well, currently it's slightly more Democrats than Republicans. It's been very even. It goes, at one point the Republicans will be up, then the Democrats are up. Currently, the Democrats are up by about 4,000 registered voters.
In percentage-wise, what are we looking at?
We're at about 34% for each of the two major parties, and then about 25% for the non-party preference.
How does it compare to the presidential election of 2008?
Well, it's a slightly higher percentage of Democrats, I think, this time than in 2008. And remember, back in 2008, it finally went from being, we had been a majority Republican county, and then we became a majority Democratic county for the first time in many, many years.
The registrar closes at 5 tonight. How many voters do you think came in earlier? Is there a guesstimate you can give us?
Well, as of 10 o'clock this morning, we already had 66 people come into our office. So I'm guessing that by 5 o'clock today, when the office closes, that we'll have more than a couple of hundred.
And it is the first day of voting today. Let's talk about mail-in ballots. There's a myth that, there's some myths about mail-in ballots we can certainly clear up. One is that when are they counted?
The mail-in ballots are counted starting about 10 days before the election. We can actually open those ballots and scan them into the system. Now, we don't release any results. No results are released until after the polls close at 8 o'clock. But those do go into the count if they come into our office timely. Now, if a lot of voters drop their mail ballots off at the polls, and those are counted after the election during the canvass process.
But there's also another myth that you don't count mail-in ballots at all unless it's a close race.
I occasionally hear this. I don't know where it comes from, and it's certainly not true. We count every valid mail ballot that comes into our office.
What's the percentage of registered voters here in the county that are actually registered, that actually show up to vote?
Well, that varies greatly from election to election. In a presidential general, though, we do see the highest voter turnout that we see during the 4-year cycle of presidential and gubernatorial elections. So this election, I anticipate that we'll probably have between 75 and 80% turnout. In 2008, the turnout was close to 84%, which was the highest in decades. But I'm not really guessing it will be quite that high this time.
Is it too late to sign up for a mail-in ballot?
No, not at all. The deadline to send in an application to vote by mail is October 30th, and the application has to be received in our office at that point. Now, after that deadline, people can still come into our office to vote in person.
We're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you, I registered online. It was quick and easy. What are some of the other options? How can people register and vote?
They can register and vote, of course, by coming into our office. That's probably the easiest. But they can also get registration forms through Department of Motor Vehicles, city clerk offices, libraries, and post offices.
All right. San Diego County Registrar of Voters, Deborah Seiler, thanks so much for the update.
You're welcome.
Peggy spoke with the registrar earlier today. Make sure you check out our KPBS voter guide. It breaks down the big races and measures into clear language with links to our stories and candidate bios. You can even take it to the polls with you on your smartphone. You can find the KPBS voter guide on our website at kpbs.org/voterguide. A pair of filmmakers who graduated from San Diego State's Television, Film, and New Media program have completed production of a feature shot in Hungary. KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando says they are in the final week of an online fundraiser to pay for post-production.
Filmmaking is always an adventure, but when you shoot your first feature in a castle in Hungary, it can be controlled chaos, says Mauricio Czernowetsky.
Because it was such a bizarre mix of elements, like here we were in another country, trying to shoot, with actors from all over Europe. Money was always an issue.
Like we'd have to, check what the exchange rate was every day. And they're like, oh, we got to lose 5 crew people, the dollar's failing a little bit.
That's co-writer and co-director Mark Devendorf. He felt shooting in Hungary was a plus.
Because you're there and you're walking to a castle every day and you're excited to be there. And you're in this amazing place that we don't really have, especially in Southern California.
But the castle posed unexpected problems.
We discovered that Angelina Jolie decided to shoot one scene in there, which meant that she basically took the castle for 2 weeks to prep it.
That meant having to redo their whole production schedule. But the filmmakers pushed forward on their updated retelling of Carmilla, a lesbian vampire story.
We didn't want to create this film where it was just the vampire and the victim. We really wanted to deal with a fantasy of vampirism as well. And the idea of the pull to the darkness and the kind of the mystery of the night.
Most of the money for the film came from family and friends, and all that money is up on the screen. Now the filmmakers are running a Kickstarter online fundraiser to pay for the post-production expenses to get the film ready for distribution.
So the Kickstarter ends October 14th. This is the big final push, and we're kind of hitting up everyone who can just give a little something to make it happen.
KPBS lost one of its most valuable players on Saturday. What I will miss most about Gloria Pinner are the hugs we shared so often. Even when she was going through chemotherapy treatments, she would actually let me hug her. Gloria was more than a friend and a coworker. She was my true confidant and cheerleader for more than 23 years.
Gloria was also my mentor, friend, and hero throughout our cancer journeys and in my news career. But I'm far from alone. We're far from alone. Her pioneering work at KPBS paved the way for me and for decades worth of journalists trying to make a difference in San Diego and throughout the nation.
Tonight on Evening Edition, we have a special tribute to Gloria Pinner from her longtime producer, colleague, and friend, Pat Finn.
Gloria Pinner joined KPBS in 1969 as Community Relations Director, a position she immediately abandoned for a camera and a microphone.
In San Diego, I'm Gloria Pinner for the Nightly Business Report.
For more than 40 years, she interviewed the people who make San Diego what it is, the movers and shakers and the ordinary people with ordinary problems. And in the process, she helped build KPBS into one of San Diego's most extraordinary and respected institutions. Gloria had a profound effect on KPBS and a special place in the hearts of her friends and co-workers, like KPBS General Manager Tom Carlo.
Gloria was the first woman to reach a management position at KPBS. She worked in many areas of the organization, and she was the one who championed women's rights and women working in the workplace.
Her goal was to bring out the inner thoughts and outward struggles of those she interviewed. Her strength was an insatiable curiosity, and her consuming interest was politics.
If more than one of the initiatives passes,
she talked to everyone she could, governors, mayors, lawmakers, and law enforcers, and she asked them some tough questions.
Claire, why keep them as guest workers? If we're admitting them into this country, why don't we allow them to come into this country and settle here and pay in their taxes and their Social Security?
About 30 years ago, I'm not sure exactly, Gloria Penner interviewed me, and I was the chief of police at that time. Well, the role of KPBS and Gloria was kind of unique in that it was not, I want to know about you, I want to know about the problems, and what are you doing about them.
Stand, Gloria, bye. She gave voice to women and minorities, single parents, seniors on fixed incomes, and striving members of the working class, because she believed we, her audience, would be better off knowing about their hopes and dreams.
One of those uninsured is a professor of public health policy.
Once she took up that microphone in 1970, Gloria Penner did not put it down until illness forced her hand. Her last broadcast was as the host of the Midday Edition Roundtable, July 20th, 2012.
Thanks to our listeners and to our callers. I'm Gloria Penner. This is the Roundtable on KPBS.